Stand close to this painting. Closer than the gallery will let you, because everything that matters here is small. And it was meant to be found only by someone willing to lean in. At first it looks simple. A man and a woman in a quiet room, hands lightly joined, 600 years old and calm as a held breath. But Van Eyck's calm is never empty. He painted proof, and every object in this room was placed here as evidence we are still learning to read. Let your eye move slowly, the way his brush did. Start with the surfaces, because that is where he begins. The green wool of her gown, gathered and heavy, so dense you can almost feel its weight in your own hands. The dark fur at his cuffs. A single brass chandelier overhead holding one candle. Lit in the full light of day, a small, deliberate oddity you might never think to question. A little dog at their feet, standing perfectly still, every strand of its coat picked out, one hair at a time. Nothing here is casual, nothing here is quick. In an age when most painters suggested the world, Van Eyck insisted on it, refusing to look away from any surface until its exact truth appeared on the panel. To him, this was not showing off. It was something closer to devotion. If you rendered a thing perfectly, you honored the fact of its existence. A dog deserved the same total attention as a face. And this was only possible because of something Van Eyck helped pioneer: oil paint. Where earlier painters worked in fast-drying tempera, Van Eyck built his images in thin, slow layers of oil glaze, and those layers let him do what almost no one before him could. Render light itself, the gleam on brass, the nap of fur, the individual beads of a rosary. He was not just painting a room, he was inventing a way of seeing that the world had never had before. So look at what he chose to spend that new power on. On the windowsill and on the chest beneath it sit a few small oranges. Easy to miss. But in Bruges in 1434, an orange was not a piece of fruit, it was a small fortune. Oranges were carried by hand over land and sea, all the way from the Mediterranean and beyond. To own them was to be wealthy enough to let something rare and expensive simply sit on a sill. Some have seen more in them than money, a hint of Eden, of innocence before the fall. But at the very least they are a quiet announcement. The people in this room can afford the impossible. Now look at the bed behind them. Rich red, heavy, filling half the room, because in a wealthy 15th century home the bed was a public thing. A symbol of status kept in the main room to be seen. And on the tall post of that bed, carved into the wood, is a tiny figure. You could easily take her for decoration. She is not. She is very probably Saint Margaret, the patron saint of pregnancy and childbirth, invoked by women in labor across medieval Europe. Van Eyck carved her, small and watchful, directly above the couple. And nearby, hanging from the bedpost, a simple whisk brush, a symbol in this reading of domestic care, of the running of a household. Do you see what is happening here? Every object is beginning to lean in the same direction. Wealth, marriage, the home, fertility. It is as though the room itself is quietly describing the life of the two people standing in it. And that is the first quiet, unsettling thing about this painting. Everything in it has been looked at too closely. Nothing is allowed to be ordinary. You begin to feel that every object is holding something back, that the fruit, the brush, the carved saint, the single-lit candle are not furniture, but words in a sentence you have not yet learned to read. Hold that feeling, because Van Eyck is about to prove it. Look at the back wall between the two figures. There hangs a mirror, a circle of glass no bigger than the palm of your hand. In many paintings, a mirror is decoration, a chance for a painter to show off a difficult reflection. So your eye almost slides past it, the way it slides past a latch or a picture frame. Don't. Lean in toward that small circle of glass. Give it the same attention Van Eyck gave it. Look first at its frame. Around the edge of the mirror runs a ring of 10 tiny discs, and each one, smaller than a fingertip, holds a painted scene. They are the stations of Christ's passion, his suffering, his death, his resurrection. Circling the glass, 10 complete paintings, each the size of a grain of rice, and around the border of a mirror in the background of a larger painting. Van Eyck rendered them anyway, because to him nothing in this room was too small to be true. And there is an order to them if you look. The scenes of Christ's death fall on the woman's side of the mirror. The scenes of his life on the man's. Even the frame is speaking if you are willing to lean close enough to hear it. Now look into the mirror itself, because slowly the reflection resolves. You begin to see the room from behind the backs of the couple, the tall window, the red bed. The whole scene curved and shrunk inside that tiny convex world. This alone is a staggering piece of painting. An entire room reflected and distorted across the bulge of a piece of glass 5 centimeters wide, every line bending exactly as it should. And then you see something you are not expecting. In the doorway reflected in the glass, there are figures, 2 of them. 2 people, one in red, one in blue, stepping into the room. People who appear nowhere else in the entire painting, except here, in the mirror, standing near the point where your own gaze enters the scene. Someone else was in that room, and Van Eyck made absolutely certain that 600 years later we would know it. Who are they? The gallery that owns the painting today is careful. Perhaps visitors. Perhaps the artist and his assistant. Perhaps, and this is the strangest possibility of all, perhaps they are us. Standing in the doorway, welcomed into a room 6 centuries deep. Nobody can say for certain. But look where they stand, exactly where a witness would stand, exactly where you are standing now. So Van Eyck showed us 2 figures in the doorway. Then above them he left evidence of another presence, his own. Look up, just above the mirror at the bare stretch of wall, and there, in careful looping Latin script, the kind you would expect on a legal charter, not a bedroom wall, he wrote a line and a date. Johannes de Eyck, fuit 1434. Jan van Eyck was here. Sit with how strange that is. Not Jan van Eyck made this. Not a name signed modestly in a corner the way a painter marks his work. To modern ears, it almost sounds like something scratched on a wall in passing. I was here. But written like this, in formal script above the mirror, it feels closer to something else. Not simply I made this, but I was present. I saw it. An almost casual phrase to us set down in an impossibly formal room. And that quiet collision is the whole painting. That single distinction, present rather than merely painter, gave rise to the picture's most famous interpretation. In the 20th century, the art historian Erwin Panofsky heard testimony in those words. He argued that this was not merely a portrait, but a kind of record, a marriage witnessed, certified, and preserved in oil. In that reading, everything settles into place. The 2 figures reflected in the mirror become the witnesses arriving at the door. The raised hand becomes a gesture of oath. The joined hands become the vow. The single candle becomes the presence of God. The little dog, fidelity. The discarded shoes, holy ground. And Van Eyck's inscription high on the wall becomes his signature at the bottom of the contract, sworn and sealed in paint. It is a seductive theory, and for a long time it felt like the answer. But here is the more honest truth, and the more unsettling one. We no longer hold the key. Later scholars pulled Panofsky's reading apart and offered others a betrothal, a memorial, even a portrait of a couple who may not be the Arnolfinis at all. Some have wondered whether the woman was already dead when it was painted, pointing to a candle on her side of the room that appears to have gone out. The gallery that holds it today names its subjects only tentatively and treats the painter's presence in the mirror as a possibility, not a fact. The certainty has quietly worn away over 6 centuries, and left us standing in the same position as those two figures in the glass. In the doorway, looking in, not quite able to say what we are seeing. And that, perhaps, is the most Van Eyck thing of all. Because look again at what he actually did. He built a room where every single object seems placed on purpose, the one lit candle, the shoes by the door, the faithful dog, the fruit catching the light, the saint carved above the bed, the 10 small sufferings ringing the mirror. He made all of it feel like meaning. He made us certain there is a message here. And then he stepped inside his own painting, wrote "I was here" on the wall, and left us alone with it. Forever. To work out what we had walked in on. Perhaps that is the quiet genius of Jan van Eyck. He did not simply paint a couple in a room. He constructed it object by object, reflection by reflection, until the painting stopped being a picture of a moment and became the moment itself, sealed in oil, still waiting for us 600 years later. He left the door open. He left the mirror facing out, and on the wall in his own hand he left the one thing he was certain of, that he was here,